Thank you, everyone. My name is Eugen Božić. I will today, hopefully, share with you our journey with automation. The talk is about GitHub, but it really, you can take it and all the practices, if you are automating any other system, is that be a SaaS product or the on-premise product, because automating software and tools is a little bit different than automating your infrastructure as a code. So, for the agenda, a little bit about me. I will explain you about our GitHub environment, just so you have a picture of how big it is, why we chose to do the automation, with what tools we do it. Also, I'll show you how we started and explain all the challenges we had along the way, or at least the big ones. Also show you now where the state of automation is, and yeah, a little summary and important topics that you may take over. So, as Patrick already mentioned, I work at AVL for 7 years now. I am in the IT for over 15 years. I have been a developer, tester, product owner, team lead, basically every role you can possibly imagine. And for the last 2 years, I am working as a cloud enterprise architect, basically contributing to our AVL journey. As you already heard from Andreas, we are in the cloud transformation, so that's quite a bit construction side there. Also, I'm leading the core automation projects, basically the Azure automation, also automation of our other systems. And I'm one of the administrators of our GitHub enterprise system. Just a question, does any of you actually use GitHub enterprise? Oh, quite a lot. Okay, then fine. Yeah, so our GitHub environment, we have one SaaS instance. I think we will also have another one because of sovereignty thingies. So data must be in Europe. If you're using GitHub Enterprise, you are not guaranteed that your data will stay in Europe, or your code will be shipped or be on the servers in Europe. But nevertheless, so our GitHub at the moment hosts around 1,600 users with more than 1,400 repositories. We have 15 organizations in GitHub, so if you don't know, GitHub Enterprise is basically you have an instance, then you have the organizations, and then under the organizations, there are repositories. So the two biggest organizations we handle is more than 600 and 400 repositories each. We are also trying to minimize the number of organizations, switch them all to few of those, based on major differences between the workflows in the departments. But yeah, so this is kind of what we currently have. The number is growing every day. But yeah. And why we chose to automate. So first, we do automate a lot of other stuff. We also have some huge systems that are managed by ClickOps. Our Azure DevOps server is, I think, 10 times bigger than the GitHub instances. And that is managed by ClickOps. And we know the pain, what you have to do if you are managing such a big system with a lot of things on a manual way. We also know the pains of automatization. We do, so these are just few systems that you may be aware that that you may know. So the SonarQube, the Artifactory, Azure. We also manage Grafana SaaS instances with automation. So we already have quite a big experience, and we know what benefits that can bring us, and we also know on the other side what and why we don't want to do ClickOps anymore. So if you are not already having automation, the big part is standardization of configuration. If you have a lot of stuff to do, if you have huge systems, you need to make sure, or you want to make sure that each, in this case, repository, but if you're talking about other systems, it can be whatever, should be configured the same way, because that usually is the first problem that you have. If you're doing manually, you will do it. You all agree how that should look like, but in the end, when someone is doing it, everyone does it a little bit differently. Someone forgets, someone doesn't someone maybe clicked the wrong thing, and then also you have later on problems, which especially are true when you have a publicly available software. So for our on-premise, it's not so much a bad thing if you forget some security checks or you put the wrong permissions on it because it's all in the company. But if you do it on a GitHub instance that is publicly available, then yeah, it's a bit more tricky. Also, the speed of doing it. So if you have the automation, you can provision stuff quickly than doing it on manual way, especially if it's not a day-to-day job. So if you do something once a month, you most likely will not remember all the things you need to go over that you provision something. That means you need to go to some documentation or some manuals or workbooks and go over each thing. And yeah, and that also slows you down regarding of putting some parameters into configuration and run the pipeline. The last or the third important thing for us is why we do it. We do it because of the integration of the entire ecosystem. You can always look at your tool or product as a singular thing, but it's always in some broader context. For us, we are talking now here about GitHub, so that's a developer tool. And for us, and if you start to develop, you need more than just repository. Right? You need, I don't know, also repositories for Artifactory where you can publish your artifacts. You need a SonarQube project for static code analysis. You maybe need some Azure subscription or some Azure resources or some on-premise resources. So it's more than just this thingy. And with integration or automation, we can slowly move, to complete automatization of the full development tool chain. And that's what we are actually aiming for. Also, on the other side, we can also automatically input the metadata of what has been done into some charging systems or some asset catalogs and stuff like that. So we always try to see the benefit also not from the tool itself, but also from the entire ecosystem and all the other tools that are surrounding what we are automating. So Patrick already mentioned we use Terraform and GitHub. So yeah, GitHub as a repository where we keep our automation. We use Terraform as the code. We also do have some scripts. I will explain a bit later why we do have scripts. But what is important is you need to pick a tool for you. We pick Terraform because of few reasons. First reason is we also use Terraform for other automation. So we use it for Azure, we use it for all the other software, so it's easier for our DevOps engineers to work with one tool. Also, my department is central IT, so most of the guys are don't have developer background. They are system engineers, network engineers, and for them, it's much easier to work with a tool that is not oriented for developers, for programmers. That doesn't mean that we don't develop. We do develop, but with that, there is always a problem that you have one or two guys that know Python, and they created some automatization. And then when they are off, it's a bit tricky. Next thing why we chose Terraform is because of the drift change. So as you know, Terraform keeps the state. You can always see what has been manually changed. That's especially important because we have systems that are not fully automized, so it's not 100% automation. It is also some manual readjustments. Also here on GitHub, I'll also show you why. So it's important that we know what has been manually changed that may affect the automated resources. In some cases, that doesn't matter, but especially for publicly facing systems, you really want to make sure that your security checks are always there, that someone did not override them or accidentally click them or whatever. So, how we started, this is a snippet of first commit that actually went through. As you see, it's a super simple Terraform project. It has just one configuration file where the repo data was, and some minimum Terraform things just to make the repositories usable. Now, that was not so good start, and I'll show you why. First things first, the Terraform state grew really, really exponentially. We got to a point where the pipeline was running for an hour and 30 minutes for like maybe 1,000 repositories, which is due to the fact that we have a state and Terraform needs to check every resource, and then after that it goes to apply. So it was really starting to get in a point where you would not be able to do development anymore because you do some changes and the pipeline runs for an hour. So that means you can do 5 or 6 changes a day. The second problem with the state is we needed to do manual adjustments to the state. Yeah, I know you don't usually do that, but that is also due to the fact that SaaS tools are not, or most of them are not API first products, and they don't have so good support for automatization. Also, GitHub is one example. We had a lot of problems with that, especially with the GitHub provider. So you always need to, if you're using Terraform, if you're using cloud, it's super cool. Provider, GitHub or Terraform provider is their first-class citizen. They make it, it's working, everything is super. The features come quite soon after the release. When you're working with products or tools, that's not usually the case. That is somewhere down the line. They don't invest so much into development, they don't invest so much into debugging, that it is there because it's cool for some of them. We did have quite a bit of problems with the provider. From the bug standpoint, also we did have problems with changing the versions. It was, keep in mind that the provider experience is not what you get when you're working with the cloud. It is quite not so fun, and especially if that forces you to change the state. And if you have a big state with million lines of code, huge JSON, it's not so super cool to manually tweak it around. Next thing, API limitations and rate limiting. So one would expect that whatever you can do in the UI, you can also do it over the API. But that is not really true. There are some, even now, there are some features of GitHub that are available over the UI, but the API, so the publicly exposed API, does not allow you to tackle that. That then means that you are in a state where if you want to use those settings, you need to do it manually. Or you then later on need to do the importing of those back into your Terraform if you want to do the automation. We also had problems with authentication methods on the API because some of the endpoints were only available if you were using token-based authentication, not the GitHub app authentication. So that ended up also changing our automation to support both, and then we picked which authentication method we need for which endpoint. Also, so as you know, as good developers, if you have a publicly available API, you need to have rate limiting. So GitHub also has a rate limiting, and it's different for different types of authentication. And you hit that limit quite fast with Terraform because it's double the calls, pretty much. So you check the states, every resource gets an API call, then after that you do the apply, then again you call the changed endpoints. So we were hitting quite fast the rate limit. And it was really a challenge to solve some of these problems. And this one is the worst. Yeah, I know. For ClickOps, sometimes you cannot really avoid it, and that's a fact. You can if you can automate the entire system, but if you are not using, or if you're not working with cloud providers, most likely that will not be the case. You will always need some ClickOps on top. The problem with ClickOps is once you allow people to just click these few things that are not available in the automation, they will start clicking all the other things. Of course, because why not? And then we also had the problems that our complete automation just broke because of poor implementation from GitHub on one side and also from our on the other side. The example at hand was GitHub pages. I think everyone knows what GitHub pages are. You can have your page based on some code in your repository. And it's all super cool. You enable it, pages are there. And what you don't know up front is once you enable it on the API level, you cannot disable it. So there is a flag, GitHub pages, which is true or false. And it is, once you click it, it's true. It cannot go back to false. You can delete the pages will not be there, but this specific setting will always stay on for the entire lifetime of the repository, and the only way to turn it off is basically delete the repository, create it again, import the data back. And what happened is we had partial implementation of the GitHub pages, so just a few parameters. And once you click that manually on, the Terraform always sees the change. It tries to revert it. It cannot revert it because that parameter can never get back to off. You cannot really run the pipeline fully because you're missing additional parameters, and your basically entire automation got stuck. So it's an extreme example, but it can happen. The third thing that you need to be aware is you most likely don't have a test instance. So of course, we do have test resources, we do have test repositories, we do have test organizations. But unlike the on-premise world, where you do have a productive system and you do have a test system because you need to test the upgrades that you do manually, on the cloud, you most likely don't have it, which means that you are developing in production. Some things can be tested with testing resources, but some things are global. So groups are global, authentication is global. All of that are global for the entire enterprise instance. And once you start testing or implementing new stuff, or even worse, changing the current behavior, you are doing that in a production for 1,600 people. So it is also quite a challenge to make everything stable, especially if you are in start of development of automatization, where you have a lot of changes, where you do a lot of tests, a lot of new features. You always need to make sure that the resources that are global are, you cannot always, of course, you cannot always predict what will happen because things break, but you at least need to be aware that this can affect the entire system, so you either need to do it on the maintenance windows or something like that. Also, there is another thing that is not on the slides. You are not the owner of the lifecycle. So SaaS is updated when it's updated. At best, you get upfront changelog, where you will see what has been changed, but you don't know when that will hit your specific instance. It will hit it at some point. That luckily it did not break the automation. There was some also changes in the API which they did, which were kind of breaking because we use Terraform, and Terraform keeps everything in the state. So then you get changes out of no reason, because now this parameter is now switched by default from true to false. So you also need to be aware that this can happen basically any day at any time. And now, going through all of these challenges, this is now just a snippet of the Terraform. See that there's a V2, so the configuration is another giant part that looks like that. What we did we ended up splitting everything into small segments. So the organization project is completely separated for the repository project. So we are automating the organizations, then we are automating the repositories. Also, the repositories are now split into their own sub-Terraform projects. But that means we split that giant repo YAML into, I think now it's 20 smaller ones. Well, and we run every configuration as a separate Terraform project, so we get a separate state file. So that means that our state files are smaller. We can, if needed, occasionally manage them manually. That means we don't run the entire automation every time, so we only run what has been changed. That also comes with additional complexity, because then in the pipelines you need to have you need to check what has been changed, which project or which TF state you need to run. You also need to keep track of the dependencies between the organizations and the repos, because repos do require some data from the organization. And then, so all the benefits we got on this side, we are paying on the complexity of the pipelines. I think we now have 7 or 8 different workflows just to keep this thing operational and running. But on the other hand, it solved most of our problems that we had. We don't have any more huge TF state files. We don't hit API limits because we run just a subset of everything. Terraform provider or GitHub Terraform provider is still an issue, and it looks like they are slowing down on the development because we have issues that were open for a year and a half ago, and they are still not merged, although they are implemented. So you always need to be aware that the provider is something someone is giving you, and they can not do the support, they can drop it completely. You always need to be aware of your, basically, that your automation can break if they decide not to support it anymore. And they can decide that in any time, because it's most likely most of the Terraform providers are open source. There is no contract. Even if you pay the license, there is no contract that you will get a Terraform provider upfront or later. So it's in the end, it's like any other open source system or software or library that you incorporate into your products. So summaries a little bit. If you don't have the automation, or you don't automate most of your stuff, and this is your maybe first, second, third time implementing the automation of some systems, you always need to know why you automate, and not because it's cool. Especially if you need to go to a manager and explain that you need automation, because then you need to have some business case around it, why it will help you. Also, don't automate because it's fun. You also don't automate if you do that once a month and it takes 5 minutes to do it. Automate where you get the most out of it, because running the automation is not something that you just write some scripts and that will run forever. It requires a lot of time. It requires also a dedicated person. In case something breaks, especially if it's a production system, in case your automation breaks and you cannot grant access to someone and they need it because of some deadlines, you can always do ClickOps, but then your technical depth in the automation just gets bigger and bigger. Always go from why you want to automate, how that will help not only that system, but also how you can incorporate that into your entire life cycle, other systems, and stuff like that. Choose the technology wisely. Don't choose it because it's cool, and I cannot tell you which is the best. Every technology, every library has its pros and cons. There is no silver bullet. There is not something that will work for all. We chose Terraform because we know the limitations, and we know that we will get pains at specific points, but still going over those is still okay for us because of the other side where we don't need to have dedicated developers to do it. We don't need to, handle five different technologies because one guy decided that he will do automation in Python, another one will do it in PowerShell, and then you have we do have that, but we are trying to minimize that. So you don't juggle with technologies because the more you have it, it's of course more expensive for everyone. It's timely consuming. You need to have people who know that, not just one guy. Because if that one guy leaves, then you are back to investing in some other guy that will learn that. So yeah, it will be a challenge no matter what you choose. Choose what better fits you, and hopefully choose. And if the product does have support for some specific technology, like a GitHub provider, or they provide some Python library or something, that is a help. But that also means that then you are dependent of what they will do with that piece of software they provide for automation. Investigate the product API. And that doesn't mean go to the API documentation and read all the features that you can do. Go to, if they have publicly issues, go to GitHub issues. If not, find Reddit or Stack Overflow. Find the problems with the API. Because most likely in the official documentation, you will never find, this does not work. Or this has limitations. They usually don't write that. You find that when you start using it. So always make sure that you know upfront what problems you will have. Because in our example, we needed to implement additional authentication methods because of API limits. And I don't think you have somewhere clearly stated, this one gives you, I think it's 5,000 calls per minute, and the token, I think, gives you 2,000 calls per minute. So that does not state very clearly when you go onto the GitHub documentation and you read it. So always try to find the issues or the problems that people have and think about that in the implementation, because especially if you work with Terraform, re-implementing is quite expensive job. You need to manage the states, you need to manage the resources, the indexes of the resources. It's hell. Start small, but not too small. So don't start as we did, that you need to refactor the entire thing. You will always need to do some refactoring, of course, but try to get that initial base, stable. Investigating the API, you figure out what the most common problems are, and you already prepare your automation to work around it if needed. So what we now do from this lesson is we always prepare every automation to support smaller multiple Terraform files, or TF states. That's what we do now by default for all of them, for Artifactory, for Grafana, for everyone. So the lesson that we learned with going big is now making us aware of that problem, and we apply the same principles to every other automation. I think that's the last bullet. Always have a dedicated persons, not one, for managing the automation. Usually it's automation. We just build it and it runs. It runs until it fails, and when it fails, then it's that's also you need to then keep in mind how much different automatizations you have in a team and how much persons you have actually managing those, because in the end you cannot just add automation on top of automation on top of automation and you have two guys that are handling everything. So same as basically software development. The more the software, the bigger is the software, the more developers you need to keep the number of features that you want to create. So the more features you have, the more also maintenance you have. And you cannot, with the same amount of people, you cannot have the same after 2 years, because now the code base is quite different than what it was before. So yeah, thank you for my side. If you have any questions, please ask. If you're shy, you can find me later outside. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugen. Are there questions from the audience? Yes, quite a lot. Let's start here.
Yeah, thank you for your interesting talk. And I was just wondering, is this like your source of truth then for your whole GitHub Enterprise instance, where you have like all organizations, all the people that are actually contributing and all repositories, or how is this being managed?
Yeah, so it is source of truth for the things that are automated. For the things that are not yet, that's of course not. But what we have the repo is internal, so everyone can see it. But we have a dedicated set of people that are responsible for each of the organization that can approve the pull request based on what that is, because based on the organization-specific requirements.
Okay, thank you.
And I think we have another one. Here you go.
Thanks for the talk. I was wondering, I assume that you started doing the automation on GitHub Enterprise where you already had some repositories. How hard was it to adapt or change the settings on the repositories to work with your automation?
So, GitHub is quite a complex system, and API is not so automation friendly. Because if you take a look, repository API, it's bajillion lights of parameters, and on top of that, each of the policy or a group assignment, everything is separate resource for Terraform. So what we did, we basically imported just the repo and rewrite everything else. Because otherwise, it's really unmanageable. You are talking just for the repo to be operational, you need 15 different resources in Terraform.
Thanks, Eugen. One last question.
Thank you. Would you advocate an automation-first policy solely based on the reason to cancel out human errors? Would that be a good reason to automate first, no matter how small or how frequent something is being done?
It depends. In theory, yes. In practice, we all know that usually it's not the case. So if it's really important or critical, then you automate, no matter what. If it's not, then you basically wage is the automation effort worth doing it. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Eugen.
Sure.
Thanks for your talk, and thanks for arriving from Croatia for us.
Yeah, thank you all.